Welcome to the Coach Speak podcast, built for coaches, by coaches, hosted by Jamie Bolton and Dustin Martin. Sponsored by Ray Crowther, providing the nation's best athletic training equipment since 1932. And R4 Football Systems. Accelerate everything by decoding the game.
Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Speak. Dustin Martin here with Jamie Bolton. Got a special guest tonight out of South Florence. Before we get going, I want to shout out to our sponsors, Team Builder, Tsunami Bar Sports, and Pro Quick Draw.
Yeah, guys, today's guest has spent years inside of one of the greatest football dynasties South Carolina has ever seen. Scott Braswell served as associate head coach and defense coordinator at Dutch Fork under legendary coach Tommy Knott, helping build a championship standard that produced state titles, national attention, and sustained dominance. Now he steps into his own chapter as the new head coach at South Florence, one of the premier football programs in the state. Coach, we're excited to dive in to what you've learned from greatness, the championship culture, and what it means to lead a program with experience. So, Coach, welcome to the program.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. I'm excited to be here and appreciate you guys having me on.
Yes, sir. So, look, you know, when you walk into a championship program every day for years, you were there for 5 years, what starts to feel like normal that most programs never really experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first two things that come to mind, number one, kind of the expectation of winning. Coach Knotts has obviously done that everywhere he's been. And after we won the first one while I was there, the next day, we're back in the weight room and the new sign's going up to win the second one. So, it's kind of an expectation of winning. And then, the incredible thing that Dutch Fork had, the work ethic, the year-round work ethic, those guys locked in on what they need to do in the weight room, what they need to do in the off season, how they need to develop themselves, the forward vision to the future, all those types of things, I think help to sustain that success.
No, that's good, Coach. We were kind of talking a little bit before we got, on air. So, Dutch Fork wins state championship in 17, 18, 19, and 20. And then you take over as DC 2021 and then fall short to Gaffney, man. Just talk us through that a little bit, because man, it's big. It feels like it's big shoes. It's a big role to fill, and you make it back to state. And then, that first year you lose in a heartbreaker. And just to mention, you did win the 4 after that, but just talk about that a little bit.
Dustin,
that
first
first
bring
year.
that up initially, man.
Hey man, it's cold open, man. Let's get into
right.
it. But yeah,
right.
Coach, just kind of talk us through that, and then what kind of kept you going. Hey, we're gonna get back on track and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I have to address is I had incredibly big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
Following Nick Pelham and the job that he had done with Coach Knotts, and I shifted the defense from kind of 3 down mentality to 4 down, and teaching some new techniques and trying to mold some of what they had done and have some similar teaching and modeling and practice habits and things like that. I think was the biggest thing coming in, and then obviously coming in on a streak like they had going. I think I lost about 10 to 15 pounds that first fall.
No doubt.
Working for Coach Knotts, and just the pressure that I felt to sustain, the pressure that I felt to succeed, the pressure that I felt to keep it going. We kind of, had a schedule that year that was maybe a little bit favorable, to where we kind of won all the games through the regular season, through the beginning of the postseason. I think that team had incredible talent, and we didn't have much adversity throughout the year. So I think that adversity in that state championship game kind of played on us a little bit, and something I've always kept in mind. But in terms of, losing that game, it was tough. I never forget a good buddy of mine, Doug Rivers, who's kind of Tom's right-hand offensive man at Dutch Fork. After that final horn blew, came and kind of put his arm around me on the sideline as I just stood there in shock and feeling like the only new piece of the puzzle and failing. Obviously, I put all of that blame on myself, and that was tough to deal with. I struggled with that for a little while, and at some point I was able to turn the page, and then I got a lot better from it. There was a lot of things that I kind of shifted to that off season and tried to get better at in terms of teaching and coaching, and that I still use to this day, and I think has made me exponentially better as a coach. So I like to think that that adversity made me better, but it was an incredibly tough situation, and it was incredibly disappointing end to a great
Mm.
season. And I really hated it for those seniors the most. Those guys, when I came in, really kind of welcomed me and bought in and did a great job. And so, feeling a little bit like I was the piece that let everybody down was very tough for a while. So
Yeah, and the good thing too, coach, and hearing you kind of talk about it is like there was something that kind of made the stream go a different way after that year, that led you on to winning four. Had and in hindsight, we don't know, but had y'all won it that year, maybe you don't take the steps that you took in the off season to become a better coach, and maybe you won it that year, but you lose two more in the next 4 years, So the outlook on that is great, like what you just said. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really appreciate your vulnerability and talking about that because taking on that ownership, a lot of guys would deflect and say, "Well, we had this happen, bad calls here, bad calls there." But the fact that you're taking ownership of that and then being like internally reflective, regardless if it's actually your fault or not, but trying to
yeah,
find some peace into that, I'm sure it's not your fault, but it's like, what could I have done better
yeah,
in those
absolutely.
situations? And coaches that are listening, it's like, we always have those faults. Coach Braswell just had it on maybe the biggest stage of his career to that point. And
Mm.
so that is almost a blessing in some ways because you're able to overcome that, like Dustin was saying. But no, I think that's outstanding. Dustin, you can go ahead now with
Yeah,
your
what do
next.
you think? I'm gonna go off script like how I do. Coming in after a guy that runs pretty much odd, and you're more of a four down guy. How was that transition for the
Mhm.
techniques and the difference and what they were running prior to you to when you took over? Was that a hard sell to the? I guess not to the kids, but just a hard sell in general to try to execute what you want to do.
Yeah. I think the biggest hurdle was kind of the personnel that was in place. That year we were a little bit low on the kind of true D line, four down type bodies. And so but we had a bunch of kind of the overhang, 3-4 boundary field overhang type guys. And the one thing I give a lot of those kids credit, we got to the point actually it was Coach Knott's idea. We were so short on D line bodies, we kind of put our two best defensive linemen, one of them being more of a true defensive end type guy inside, and then kind of using those boundary overhang type guys that weren't quite athletic enough to play to the field, but had been used to playing in the box and defeating blocks and things like that. And so we had some smaller bodies that were kind of just we let them stand up 2 point stance and kind of play a five technique and a nine technique from that position. And um, that was the biggest piece initially, just trying to, kind of shift the personnel that we had to the scheme. And, again, I give those kids incredible credit because they, were used to playing outside linebacker or whatever. And then, me moving them down and being, face up on the tackle. And those kids, really battled and did a great job of kind of learning and adjusting and buying in and doing a great job. So, I think, first and foremost, that's probably the most important, or the most difficult piece. Um, and then, in the back end, it wasn't too bad because, we were able to kind of mirror a lot of the run fit teaching and a lot of the run support and, coverage aspects of it. Nick Pelham being, kind of cover two, cover three guy primarily. And, that being a big part of what we did. A lot of our cover three stuff being more like, fire zone 303 deep type stuff. But, um, I think the front was the hardest piece. I obviously, especially with the personnel that we had. I mean, we had John Buteau, who was really, came, I think, to Dutch Fork as a running back. We had, Jarvis Green and some other guys that were really good at running back. And so he got, kind of an opportunity to come to defense and embrace that. It's credit to those kids. And but I think the personnel piece and then the front teaching was the biggest hurdle coming from Nick's system.
Yeah, and I think that kinda goes hand in hand. It's like we're gonna be teaching different techniques, but also we're teaching kids who traditionally wouldn't do this in the first place,
Yeah,
It's like not only are we taking the outside linebacker and making him learn defensive end, we're also putting him in a situation where his body type typically probably isn't,
yeah,
normal to that. You mentioned
absolutely.
Jarvis Green. I actually coached him in the U Shrine Bowl
Did you?
when he was a
Okay.
rising ninth grader. He was a
Yeah.
freak. He was a
Yeah.
freak,
Yeah.
man.
He was awesome, man.
I think there were like 7 Dutch Fork kids on that team,
Yeah.
and we won clearly, but
Yeah.
it was wild. But you mentioned him, Coach Tommy Knotts. We got to ask. You hear about him. What would you say as a defensive coordinator that working under him? What do you think he does better than most like head coaches out there?
Yeah. I think, looking back and especially initially working for Coach, he has the most incredible attention to detail, I think, of anybody that I've been around. I mean, especially that first year walking into Sunday meetings after a win, and typically a big win after walking into Sunday meetings after a big win, and the things that he had issues with, the problems that he saw, the things that he wanted to address. Um, at that time were kind of, you know, I don't want to say things that I had missed, but kind of secondary in my mind. But in the long run, just that attention to detail, I think, was just at an incredible level where there was no detail that was missed, there was no stone unturned, and we benefited from that, and the team continued to get better throughout the year, each week. And so, it was kind of a steady climb throughout the season to where we're peaking at the end of the season, and we're playing our best ball at that time, a lot in part thanks to his detail throughout the regular season or whatever. So um, that would be the first thing that stands out, and especially was a little bit of an adjustment, and made those Sunday meetings a little bit nerve wracking. Walking in there just not really sure what he was going to point out, not really sure what he was going to call out, not really sure what issues he was going to have with what we were doing on D or whatever. And so I think that'd probably be the most prevalent piece.
And that makes sense. I mean, I think when he's had so much success, I mean, obviously great coaches on staff, has got to be one of the, if I'm sure if you would ask him, but like one of the questions, and you kind of answer this, was like, how do you avoid complacency in that when he's won so many championships and you've won so many championships? Well, you just kind of answered it. It's like, you're never like satisfied with just the
Yeah.
win. It's like, we're not satisfied with the process, or what little thing can we tweak here? And so does that kind of permeate itself, not just with the coaches, but throughout the players and practice and game planning?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's no doubt that the complacency piece was a big battle the whole time, and I think it was something that he preached and we coached on, and we kind of you know modeled after the Nick Saban thought process of kind of the standard, and the standard is to play our best ball, period, no matter the score, no matter the team, no matter the whoever it was. And so I think as the season went on and those kids got adjusted to that, they were used to kind of that terminology and that way of looking at things, and I think we're able to look at themselves in that same kind of lens and realize when they had performed, you know, to their potential and when they had not. And so
Mm.
I think that had benefited the kids as well in terms of them just, being able to, you know, kind of examine themselves at the same time, and listen to the preaching and the coaching and develop as they go.
I bet it's really nice to kind of, like you said, it's nerve wracking, but it's also nice to work for someone like that where no matter how the performance was, if you shut a team out, when you come in, there's going to be something that we could be better at, because it's hard. Sometimes you have guys on staff who under play kind of what we did, like, oh man, we only gave up 7 points, and then but you watch, it really wasn't because we were good enough to hold them to 7. It was because they were terrible enough not to score 28. And to have guys around you that constantly look at it that way, not satisfied with the result. It's like, hey man, like, yeah, that team wasn't very good. And it's like we had a game like that last year where we held them to 3 points to the fourth quarter, and we gave up 17 cheap points, and I was pissed, because it's very simple stuff. But you know, and I think that's why I enjoyed coaching with Jamie this last year, because we didn't have a lot of time to focus on each other's side of the ball, but we would ask questions, and then sometimes like he would notice something terrible we're doing, and he'd call it out, and vice versa. It's just like, you know why you're giving up sacks? Because your OL's taking one set and punching. Like I hope we play y'all next week. Just
Yeah.
little stuff like that.
Right.
It's like,
Or
but
like,
it's good to
or
have
we
those
like we hit
people.
like a, yeah, like, or we hit like this like 3rd and 20 or we hit a bomb, right? And like everybody's super excited. I'm like, well, dude, we just had like 2 straight false starts and a holding penalty or something. It's like, yeah, thankfully we scored. They freaking
Yeah.
bailed us out.
Yeah.
Like our
Yeah.
athletes bailed us out. Like I'm pissed,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that I love hearing that. And
And
like now that you're kind of stepping into this role as a head coach, like, what are maybe some things that, you took from, Tommy or Dutch Fork, and how are you kind of implementing those now at South Florence?
Mm,
yeah, it did kind of reflecting a little bit on your previous point there. There's, I keep saying to the staff at South Florence, like, hey guys, watching these cut ups of Dutch Fork, like I have no illusions of grandeur. I'm not a genius.
mm, mm,
I'm not that, but we had great players. And so,
mm,
um, that a lot of times led us to some big leads or, some lopsided scores. But the idea of kind of continuing to chase perfection or that standard was a big piece. But I think um, kind of having to shift the model a little bit. I'm used to kind of being at Dutch Fork and having a B team, or excuse me, ninth grade team, and not having that at South Florence. Kind of figuring out how that jives a little bit, but really trying to copy a lot of the model of incorporating the
sure.
middle school,
Mm,
getting those kids in the weight room, getting those kids practicing with us in the summer and things like that nature, and really trying to begin that development piece, um, at the seventh grade level. And, I think one thing that, I probably should have spoke on earlier is I think Coach Knott's ability to create overachievers, and
mm,
just the program that he has. I mean, I used to kind of joke with people about Dutch Fork being the football factory. Those kids walk in as scrawny little seventh graders, and then even if they're somebody that's relatively average in terms of size or athleticism, they've been in the program since their seventh grade year. They've been developed to the point where, as a senior, they can be a starter, be a contributor, be a major piece of the puzzle due to, their time in the weight room, their time with athletic development, their coaching over the years, and just um, the way that, that development takes place. I think is probably the
mm,
biggest piece that I would love to try and be able to emulate at South Florence. I think we, obviously coming into a program like South Florence, a lot of success, a lot of credit to Coach Marlowe and his staff for what they have done here. And, just trying to use anything I can steal or, take from Dutch Fork and try and, take another step and continue to sustain or build on that success that they've had. So, I think the biggest thing for me coming in is just how do we increase that development level,
mm,
and how do we, take, um, some guys that aren't future, Division I players and make
mm,
them to be,
mhm.
high level high school football players. And
Yeah.
so, I think that development piece is probably the biggest piece. Um, and then also just general, practice structure and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. The development piece, I mean, obviously looking at Dutch Fork, you always think, man, they got such great athletes, but really it's like you're saying, like even when we watched some film last year, they're not like they don't look a lot different than everybody.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there are a lot of good role players and they play the game very well. Kind of taking a step back here, during your time, when did you think, man, like I'm ready to step out and leave a great program and try to, do this on my own?
Yeah. I think I think I thought that very early on,
Mhm.
but I don't know that that was valid.
Yeah.
I think very early on I felt like that was what I was ready to do, and but I think that the amount of time that I spent there was the right amount of time. I
Mm,
think I think obviously like we talked about coming out of that first year and the loss to Gaffney, there was a lot of growth that came from that, and
mhm,
then again, just kind of continuing that model of lack of complacency and continuing to trying to develop and grow and always keep an eye on the future. Seeing who we need to develop, where we have deficiencies, how
mm,
we can best use personnel, those types of things. And so, I think the longer that I spent with Coach Knotts, I benefited from all of that. So, whereas I
yeah,
think relatively early on, I was gung ho and ready and or felt like I was that way. But, um, I think that the time that was spent there was well spent. And I think
mm,
that, this South Florence thing kind of came around at a good time for me. And, in hindsight, I think it was about perfect timing. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's crazy, coach, because you're you're there 5 years and you take a head job, and then I don't know him, but I saw that a head coach took the DC job. So it's like seeing a guy leave a head coaching spot to go to a school of that caliber, and kind of hearing you talk. I think you have a good feel for not cookie cutter and trying to do it exactly the way it was done where you were previously, and understanding, like you said, there's no ninth grade team, so how do we work around that? How do we fix that? Just to kind of give you a heads up, I know you're probably prepared for this, but the new thing you're going to have to get used to is calling the defense. I assume you're calling it, and also being head coach. That was fun the very first year. Like, I'm over there on the iPad trying to figure it out, and they're like, "We need a timeout." And I'm like, "Somebody call it!" Like, you know what I mean? It's like, so
yeah,
just somebody do it. And that's what I learned after a couple games. Like, man, I just don't have the ability or the time to try to make adjustments between drives, because I'm trying to, hey, it's 3rd and 6, so I got 2 here, and I'm like, well, it depends on what you do on 3rd and 6, but
yeah,
but man, so that'll be fun for you. I think you'll enjoy that, and
yeah.
it'll be
I'm looking
good.
forward to it. I'm dreading the timeout piece. There's no
Yeah,
doubt. I'm kind of
it's
developing a plan, but
yeah,
I'm
it's
dreading that, and I'm interested to see, that was I loved that piece of Dutch Fork, and being able to truly 150%, can, be, finger on the trigger with the defense and with those guys under the tent the whole time, and watching, series in between, watching drives in between series and things like that. And being able to really, kind of have my finger on every adjustment or every substitution, those types of things. And so, I'm a little bit intrigued as to how
yeah.
that will go.
Jamie,
And
how'd that go for
Dude,
you, man?
yeah, I was the same, man. Like, I would, like, mess up, like, when to go for 2, and, like, I would, like, have, like, timeout issues, and, like, I even had my cheat sheet. You have, like,
yeah,
all your whole
yeah,
game plan, like, and I was actually, like, really good at it at York. So I was at York with Bobby Carroll, and
yeah,
I was kinda his guy when it came to that, like, "Hey, this is when we sh." But, man, for some reason, when you put, like, the head coaching hat on, it's like, I'm calling the offense, I'm doing this, like, so I had to get Kevin Fox, he was an assistant, coach for us, and he'd be my guy, man. Like, I'm saying, "Hey, man, I need the situation." Say, "Hey, look, on this drive, expect to call a couple timeouts, whatever the
Mhm.
case may be. Hey, if you score, you got to go for 2." So he was really good. So I could kind of offload all those little extra, meta thoughts, and then really focus
Yeah,
on the play call. And that's the game planning thing jumps on you quick. I remember
yeah,
that. It's like, oh man, this is on me. If I screw this up, I may have made like all the great play calls in the world. I mean, I can kind of screw up this last drive or whatever. Now,
mhm,
offensively, I think it's a lot easier to dictate, the circumstances, like with the play call. I know when I'm going to
yeah,
go for it on
yeah,
4th. I know when I'm going to go
sure.
for 2, or whatever the case may be. So you might have a different
and that
perspective as you kind of take
I
that
will
role.
say, and to add on to Jamie, I think it is easier to call the defense and be the head coach in the game management portion,
Yeah,
but you do have to work on being a good communicator with your OC. So,
yeah,
like, my buddy knew we crossed the 40. Hey, you got 2 here. It's 1st and 10. You
Yeah,
got 2
yeah.
here, brother. Like, go ahead and
Get
start
a free
thinking that
play.
way.
let's
But
do it.
but it's like, on offense, you're constantly worried about the situation of, okay, what is the situation? What's the time on the clock? What down
Mhm.
is it? How much time do we have? Defense is kind of like, how much time do we have to make sure we stop them here? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
okay, they only got 20 seconds. Like, we're good. Like, we keep
yeah,
the ball in front. And so I will say, I think, that it is easier in my opinion. I've called offense. I've never been a head coach and called offense, but I could imagine it being a little more stressful as an OC.
well, and just to piggyback on that, I feel incredibly blessed because I've been able to hire 2 coordinators at South Florence, and one being a guy named Neil Boozer that was with Pelham for 4 or 5 years, and then was with me for about 3. And he was up in the box for me when we were together at Dutch Fork, and he kind of knows what I'm looking for. He knows the system. He knows, we're I think, I anticipate us to not skip a beat, and I'm going to lean heavily on him, and have him, kind of you know, be surrogate me under the tent when
Mhm.
needed. And I think I'll be able to, relatively quickly and easily, talk to him about, hey, hey, we got to address this. We got to talk about that. We got to bump a bump. whatever it might be. And so very blessed to have him coming, and feel really great about that. And then was able to hire Patrick Kuhn away from River Bluff. And so Patrick and I have had a great relationship for the past few years. And he and I worked the coaches combine at York last year, and we kind of knew we were both coming from the Columbia area, and we rode up there together. I don't think he really knew it at that time, but that 90-minute car ride up, that 90-minute car ride back, was kind of an interview for him. And
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
quizzing him
awesome.
on, okay, so how are you building the passing game? Where are you starting with
yeah.
that? Run game, what, just picking
That's
his
awesome.
brain a little bit, but at the same time, kind of trying to prep, like, okay, I know this guy's a great dude. We're buddies. He's great. This and that. Let's see, where he's at mentally, and but incredibly excited to have him aboard. And hired him thinking he was good, and then he's been exponentially better since then. And
Wow.
he's put his heart and soul into prep for this spring, and just appreciative of his work and dedication, and very excited to have him aboard. So
Yeah,
I feel
I
very
met him
blessed.
down there too in Myrtle Beach, and I know he was working with Zeb and them, and I'm good buddies with Zeb. And so Jamie, I don't know if he's an R4 guy, but I know he's at least heard of it being around Zeb. And
Mhm.
man, like I talked with him at the clinic a little bit, and man, shout out, shameless plug to Dub Maddox, man, the R4 system. He does a
Makes his
phenomenal
way
job. He
somewhere. That
he
that's a
does.
stressful that's a stressful thing though, I think, when you first take a job, because
Yeah.
that the assistant coach piece is obviously so huge that goes without saying, but when you can get those pieces in and then they turn out better, I think that's like you said, it's a blessing, and you guys are full tilt. So you guys are, I guess we're all starting next week, but so I don't know when this will release, but we'll probably be into spring ball by then. But how much time have you had? Like, when were you able to, like, get there earlier in the semester you've been with the kids, like, on campus? And how soon were your coordinators able to access the kids?
Yeah, so I was hired, I don't remember the exact date, but kind of mid-February, and then I was able to, get on campus starting at the beginning of March. And
Mm.
so in kind of that time frame in between, tried to, take a couple sick days and whatnot, and get down there, be around the kids, and start meeting with staff and things like that, and getting a feel for the campus during the day. And um, so that was kind of the timeline generally. And then at this point, we've Patrick and Neil have come for a couple of days, just to be around, last block football class, and be around the kids some, and be around for some, staff events. We had a big staff meeting last Saturday. um kind of getting everybody in the same room all together, all staff at the same time for the first time, was huge. And we had a blast. It was a great day. It was a great time. We kind of started talking, just kind of scheduling, spring, summer plans, the way things would roll, kind of the way that, we've got our Google Drive set up, where all the information and the organizational pieces are, and how everything was going to work. And then we broke up O&D, got some lunch brought in, some Jersey Mike's. Shout out to Jersey Mike's. Um, but
Not
it,
sponsored,
Get
yeah.
us
but
that
they can be.
sponsorship.
We'll take it. We'll take
Hey,
it.
I'm just trying to work a plug.
Hey
Just
man,
Thanks,
I'll
man.
eat
You'll
I'll
get
eat
a
a
cut.
club
You'll
I'll
get a
eat a
cut.
club sub every episode if we get that.
Italian, man. Yeah, Mike's
but
way.
that's, yeah, no doubt. But and then got back to a little more ball, and it was a great day to finally have everybody in the same room, to finally kind of get down to the nitty gritty. I feel like getting a job, initially, you're kind of drinking from a fire hose, or I felt like I was a gerbil running on a wheel, just running and running and running, and not really making any ground, but doing a lot of the organizational, and budgeting, and inventory, all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more tedious. So to be able to get those guys all together on Saturday, and actually turn the page of the ball a little bit, and have spring ball
That's
in our
awesome.
sights, was huge. And again, the staff camaraderie was great. I feel really great about the staff, and just really excited for the guys that stayed, and the new guys that are coming in. So um, just ready to get going. Tired of
Yeah.
Yep,
tired of
Heck
sitting at a
yeah.
computer, ready to get on the field.
I get
no
it. Yeah.
doubt.
All right. Coach, I think we're going to shift a little bit more to kind of your defensive philosophy here. Talk a little bit
Great.
more about defense. What are your defense non-negotiables? Like, what is something you don't? It doesn't matter what you're going to run. This is what you're going to be known for on defense, and if it's not, you're going to make sure that's the first thing you're going to get.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the hardest piece is probably, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but the hardest piece I think is the training of the D line. I mean, in the 4 down system, we're the terminology we've used is kind of bite the neck, but attacking the view of the neck of the offensive lineman that you're lined up on, and staying to your technique and maintaining gap integrity and those types of things. Um, I think that's always been, I think, the hardest piece. Teaching those D line guys and the idea of um, we want to dominate and win the line of scrimmage, and then we don't, in terms of normal down a distance type thought. We're really not looking for penetration. Base D, we want to be able to execute. We want defensive line to get their feet on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage, and then we want to play lateral from there. And so every D lineman wants to go get sacks and get stats and TFLs and all that kind of stuff. And if you're single-minded in that kind of brain train or thought process, then you got seams that are opening up. That's been kind of something we've been preaching on here in South Florence at this point. Is like, if we've got an A-gap defensive lineman that's at the line of scrimmage, and then we got a 5 technique that's 5 yards up the field, we're just creating run seams, and you guys technically are in your gaps or whatever, but at the same time, because of the different levels there, we're creating seams, and we're making gaps bigger, and we're making the linebacker's job harder. Same thought process, just the idea of any kind of veer release, down block, really squeezing that guy flat, keeping the backer clean, servicing your teammate, kind of being a selfless player at the defensive line. I think is as transitioning from Pelham stuff, and then now being at South Florence, I think that's been the hardest piece in terms of coaching. That is kind of in my mind, the priority. The first thing is getting that D line trained the right way. Um, and part of that thought process, to get back to your question, is just the idea of, I truly believe in the idea of, execution and, out functioning the opponent, and the emphasis on fundamentals of technique and doing things the right way. And, obviously everything doesn't work out, the way that you can draw it on paper, but at the same time, we want to try and train those guys to have, just simple fundamentals of their position, to be able to execute at a high level, regardless of what we're doing. And so, again, that D-line piece, kind of being my focus going into this spring. And then, obviously, I always talk to the kids about the idea of, defensively, our number one job is tackling. We have to be great tacklers, and then, just talking with them in meetings at this point, and going through drill work with them in terms of, here's how we're going to practice tackling. Here's how we're going to do it in group settings. Here's how we're going to do it in individual settings. Here's how we're going to do it in non-contact periods. Here's how we're going to do it at different times. And so, obviously, the foundation of defense being, tackling and pursuit. So those two in terms of general, probably fundamentals. And then, I think in getting a little bit more nitty gritty, and kind of my biggest focus going into the spring is kind of getting that D-line trained the right way. The idea that those guys, I think, can fix a lot of problems, or clean things up, and allow those backers to go make those plays.
And saying things like, these cliches of like gap sound and gap integrity, and we got to do this and that, like, but then you turn the tape on and you don't see that a lot, with some of these teams. They can maybe be really, really athletic and fast, but they're not playing with great technique, and they're allowing offensive linemen to get off on linebackers, and they're getting upfield and getting trapped, and it's like they're not reading blocks. It's like they're just pass rushing, and it's like, there's one thing to say and there's another thing to teach it. Now, do you specifically teach that group, or do you have another coach that you've kind of onboarded to go through that process?
Yeah. The beauty of being at Dutch Fork was, we had position coaches for each group. So I was able to kind of float and kind of visit each one, and I could kind of work the practice schedule out where I knew, okay, we got this many periods of Indy. These periods I'm going to be with this group. These periods I'm going to be with this group. And so, that was an incredible blessing. I think right now it looks like in the spring I'm going to be coaching the backers, and so I'm going to have less ability to, kind of float and hit those different groups. And so I think the communication piece off the field is going to be huge with the coaches. Right now, we've got a guy named Troy Biddy and Stan Adams is going to coach our defensive line at South Florence, and I feel really good about those guys' knowledge and the meetings that we've had. And so right now, I'm going to lean very heavily on them. I think I have a very specific and kind of relatively detailed way that I like things to be coached and taught. And so, the biggest piece is going to be getting that verbiage kind of echoed through them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, kind of, my goal is to use kind of that meeting room, meeting time to kind of be able to hit all positions and kind of reiterate the things that I think are pertinent for each position, and, the fundamentals of technique again, and those types of things. So, I'm going to lean heavily on those D-line guys this year. Again, I got Neil Boozer coming with me, who's going to kind of oversee the secondary with David Robinson. And so, I feel really good about the secondary with Coach Boozer kind of already knowing the terminology and the techniques, and us
Right.
working together and having history. And so, definitely that D-line piece is going to be, it's always a challenge, kind of, shifting fundamentals or thought process related to the way
Sure.
those guys play. But I'm going to lean heavily on those guys this year. So,
Yeah. And I think, I kind of learned that last year, like early on, like preseason and whatnot. Like I found out real fast how good of a technician coaches, our DL coaches were. Like, man, they were some of the best with get offs and hands and shedding blocks and being nasty. And then I would kind of see we weren't as detailed oriented as I would have preferred on how we react to blocks or do things. So I made sure to try to do the best I could to communicate, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm looking for. And I found, like you said, you got to structure the schedule sometime, because I coach backers, and it's like we got to make sure that, maybe Indy isn't 10 minutes, maybe Indy's 5, and then we take that extra 5 to come together group to make sure that we are attacking the blocks the right way, because it's, and I think Jamie understands why I text him now when I listen to your clinic. It was like, this guy's it. Like, man, it's because he was showing like how he teaches. Coach was doing a great job showing how he teaches, how do we react to this and do this. And I think
And there's just not a lot of coaches that do that. I mean,
no,
because I
no,
don't think they have the knowledge base or the attention to detail like Coach
sure.
Braswell has. But like, and I'll think about too, like on offense, it's like I can't coach the OL, but I'm onboarding 2 new offensive line coaches this year, and it's like they probably have their own thoughts about how to block
Yeah.
these schemes. And it's like, well, I'm going to onboard you. These are the base techniques. Like we're going to near and far step, and we're going to, there's all these details with this. And they look at me like, dude, you're not an offensive lineman. And I'm like, well, I know, but like,
But it's
I've
just
coached
like, well,
for a while,
here's what I do
like,
know. In a couple weeks, if we're not executing, I'm going to reiterate this
I'm
is
going to
what
reiterate
what
the
we need to be
details that I
doing.
want you to do.
Yeah.
No, but these guys are great. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there is a fine line when you want to create that
Sure.
buy-in. Have you had, and I guess you're going to go through your first spring with this group coach, but like trying to allow, I want this basic stuff taught. And then when do you allow for that freedom, I guess? Do you envision how you would allow for some freedom of like maybe it's a little bit of a terminology piece with like a technique or a communication? Just talk through us about your
yeah.
overall thoughts.
Yeah, I think, I think to get to that point, I got to backtrack a little bit where, the past, let's see, I guess about the past 2 years at Dutch Fork, we've had some pretty elite guys in the defensive line. And so, I Coach Knott's, again, attention to detail continuously, like coming over, like, hey, man, you need to go down there and work that D line. That's the best part of our defense. We got to maximize the best part of that defensive unit. And so that really forced me to kind of truly, as a former DB and former slow DB, but as kind of forced me to take on more of the front and to delve into that with more depth and kind of develop more of a thought process on the way that that I like those things to be taught. And so, at this point, I've kind of gone through with our defensive line coaches, kind of the very fundamental ways that I want things taught, the way that I want things done. And then at that point, what I've told them is like, hey, okay, now, if we can get these things done and the guys that have understanding of this, now it's up to you guys as coaches to kind of identify the guys that are ready for the next step. I mean, and Coach Morton, as I talked about in that clinic, we're going to give them, starting off, we're going to give them initial, specific pass rush moves to use against the pass that they're getting and things like that. And so, if they're a guy that's maybe a young guy or somebody that's not real polished or hadn't done a whole lot of work outside of the practice time that we have, they're probably going to stay with those techniques and
Right.
pass rush moves or whatever. But if it's a guy that's putting in the work in the off season and going to extra training and working on his craft and has the ability to do more, then we're gonna open that door a little bit, and then at that point it's gonna be on them to kind of develop that second and third type pass rush move or whatever. But
Mhm.
so I think just kind of the foundation of kind of the way that I want things to be talked about and taught is kind of been communicated, and then from there I'm kind of putting it on them as to hey, you're more advanced guys, we can take another step, we can go deeper, but it's got to be kind of case by case basis, somewhat related
Right.
to the skill set that those guys have and the football IQ that they have. So
Yeah, and I think that also kind of applies to assistant coaches also, hey, do you have a 10-year veteran who, really knows DL technique play, or do you have a 1 or 2-year guy fresh out of, like, college or high school who's still learning,
yeah,
And I think it's important to understand that, and when you're trying to like, Coach, I know you've been around the block, and I know you do the flipper block on the OL. That's great. That's not how we do it anymore, It's just,
Right.
like, little things like that. It's
Yeah, and like
those
young coach, yeah, like
and then
young coaches
yep,
listening. Like if you're a
yep.
young coach, like, and I remember being a young coach, and I'm like, man, I got my own. I'm the head coach of my position, and like, yeah, that's all great, but like, it's ultimately your job to see through the vision of the coordinator and the head coach. And it's like, if they have non-negotiables, man, don't buck the system.
yeah,
Like, learn those non-negotiables and just add it to your repertoire. And then maybe you earn that trust and credibility. And now, hey, coach, I know we're working this like, TGOG build, whatever it is. It's like now, like, you think we can advance this kid because this tool might not be working as well as this other tool might. And then so, you just have these conversations. I think about like our receiver coaches all the time. I think the other day we had guys out there doing like a double stick release, and it's like, man, this kid can't do a single stick yet. Like, we need to make sure we're going back to single stick and diamond release. I'm sure it's the same for DL. It's like, if he can't master like a base like club rip and like, it's like, I think we're kind of talking the same stuff here, but
absolutely,
yeah, it can be hard.
yeah.
Yep.
So
Coach, all right, hopefully no one that plays you this year listens to this part, but what you would let's just say over the last 5 years, what offenses have given you the most issues? Is it like we can talk personnel wise or motion shift wise or
yeah,
what? Like, what do you hate? It's like, man, here we go. Like we're seeing this week, and obviously double tight, double wings probably something we all say that too. But
yeah,
like, what is something over the last couple of years where you're like, man, this is tough.
yeah. I think again, got to go back to that growth piece after the first year at Dutch Fork. And, I got there and Coach Knott's offense was so in depth, so many shifts and motions and all those kind of things. And, at least starting, especially that first spring and summer, I kind of felt like I was having a halfway game plan for practice just to make sure that coach didn't make me look bad at practice or whatever. And so, that first year, coach being, 11 and probably more predominantly 12 personnel, we were, defending 12 personnel all spring and summer. And then where we struggled the most that first year was getting into the 10 personnel world and things like that. And so, we really struggled, um, especially that second year, or excuse me, especially that first year, you know, basically practicing against 12 all spring and summer, and then all of a sudden getting in the season and people, are in, 10 personnel. And, all of a sudden now there's a whole bunch more space and we got to, have checks and adjustments and cancel gaps and do stuff. And so, um, I think that was the biggest thing coming out of that first year in terms of just kind of practice structure or practice planning, especially in the summer. was just making sure that we got that 10 personnel work. And, everything that we did with Coach Knotts being more, again, 12 and 11, but more predominantly 12. And so I think, that's one thing, and maybe that part of that too is, being a 4-down guy, but just, kind of adjusting to that space, adjusting to, the people trying to spread you out and things like that. I mean, you guys, being in that part of state, Northwestern, I think is probably the best that we faced in terms of doing that and putting defenders in conflict and having to have answers for RPO throws and different things like that. But I think, you know, generally speaking, that's probably the biggest adjustment is at so far,
Yeah.
speaking mostly from Dutch Fork since we haven't practiced at all yet at South Florence, but people that spread us out with us, used to fight in the phone booth, was
Sure.
was
Yeah.
kind of the biggest piece to adjust to, and making sure the guys were aware of what calls we needed to make, what adjustments we needed to
Sure.
make, adjustments of alignment or um, you know, being able to function and tackle and cover in space.
Yeah.
So that's
And
definitely probably the most predominant thing that comes to mind immediately.
yeah, and to your point, it's like what you see a lot, you get good at. So like, I'm sure when you see teams that were similar to that, it paid off. But like you're saying, and it's funny because I felt that way. Like Jamie and my the previous OC I worked with, they can throw the ball. Like they know how to read it. They can, and they've had quarterbacks who can absolutely shred you. So I always felt like we were prepared pass game wise, and obviously run game as well. But like I feel like the best quarterback we would always see the last 3 years is at practice, and I'll put my money on that, and then you talk about the Northwesterns. I think the thing that they do so well is they take advantage of every bit of space there is. It's not, and if you can't cancel gaps, you can't play in a minus fit. It's going to be a long night
Yeah.
because as soon as you're trying to take all the space exterior away, they're going to find a way to run that quarterback. They're going to find a way to add a gap on you, and but to your point, thinking through that a little bit, like I feel like our strong suit has been 11 personnel. And like, I feel like that's what we've seen the most at practice moving forward, and 12,
It's
we've
always,
never,
if you're like a triple option offense, it's like obviously it's going to be hard for you to defend any kind of, spread attack. Like it's definitely difficult, but when they see, you know, those heavier run teams, it's a little bit easier on them. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, coach. Do you, so are you going to run so are you going to be running more 12 personnel now that you're at South Florence on offense? And is that strategic into like controlling the game, or are you going to run more of a spread system?
Yeah. I think we'll probably be predominantly 11. I think Coach Kuhn's got, a great system, a great plan in place. I think in terms of position groups, our offensive line is probably probably the most efficient in terms of bodies and size and things of that nature. So I don't know that we'll be able to get in 12 and kind of pound people the way that I think South has been able to do in the past. And so I think offensively we're in for a little bit of a shift where we're going to need to use some RPO throws and get some defenders in conflict. We're not going to be able to run into loaded boxes. We need to have answers built in and things like that. And so, we've got some pretty elite skill at the wide receiver. We've got probably 5 or 6 guys that I feel really good about. And so,
Mm.
2 running backs that are really great. And how do we use that personnel to our advantage? We got to get the ball on the perimeter some. How do we do that? So I would bet we're probably predominantly 11 with 10 being our kind of second main grouping. And then again, just trying to figure out how we can maximize that skill that we have. We do have a big athletic quarterback that that again, you talked about, +1 run game and things like that. So that's probably going to be a good staple of it as well. But I think we just have to be really smart and kind of manage what we're trying to do related to what the kids can handle with the new system,
Mhm.
and then obviously just the personnel that we have and a little bit of deficiency in the offensive line and how we can maximize the skill that we have.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I know you're chomping at the bit to get out there in the spring to see, okay, what can we actually do to get an idea? Okay, what's summer going to look like? Let's get an idea, guys. Like, what can we do defensively and offensively? But, I think, you know, I would say I feel like predominantly in South Carolina, most head coaches are offensive guys, and I could be completely wrong, but like, how cool is it, to have an OC that can come to you and say, "Hey, man, what in the heck is going on defensively here? Like, what, you know what I mean?" Because it's like, there's not a lot of guys in that situation. I feel like it's always, offensive head coaches with hiring defensive guys. So that's pretty cool, man. I'm excited for y'all and to see what y'all do and keep up with y'all this year. And man, it's going to be fun to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, man.
But
I'm
absolutely,
pumped. I'm excited, and it's kind of fun. Like right now, myself and Patrick kind of little, pre-spring, little back and forth. And I keep telling him I'm going to heat him up, and you kick his ass all spring, and he's got his quick responses and whatnot. But with
yeah,
us having some overlap, him being at Lexington for years,
mm,
and then River Bluff for years, and us playing each other multiple times a year. I think he knows kind of what I want to do. He knows my system as well as probably anybody, and in terms of offensive side. And so I'm excited to get out there against him and kind of see what he's able to have success with, where we can develop. And um, so I think it's a great fit, and like you said, just chomping at the bit to get out on the field.
yeah, I bet,
No
man. And
doubt.
Jamie, you want to hit rapid fire? Hit
Yeah,
coach
let's
with a
get
couple
into it.
questions and close it out. All right, cool. You go ahead. You start it off.
So, coach here at South Florence, they've been very successful. What do you think is harder, sustaining success, maybe like a Dutch fork, or finding that extra like 10 or 20% at South Florence in this transitional period?
Yeah, I think one thing that's been a very pleasant surprise in this transition is the kids, or the culture is solid. The kids are solid. We got great kids, and they're used to kind of grinding. They're used to working. They're used to being coached hard, and um, so in terms of the transition piece, I think they have high expectations. I think that there is a standard in place, and so that's been very positive. That's been refreshing. I do sense, with them kind of, again, they played for the past four state championships, won two of them. They lost this past year in a tough one to South Point that wasn't great for them. I think coming off of that loss, I think there is a hunger there, and I think the guys are focused and determined, not only to get back, but to finish it on their terms. And so, um, I guess I think that's been the easiest piece so far in terms of trying to speaking to the kids and talking to them about just standards and expectations and those things. It's resonated, I think, with them, and the feedback that I've gotten from them, and the way that they've worked, and the way that they've adjusted to some of the changes that we've made at this point has proven that they're highly focused and highly motivated. And so that's been great. I mean, the best part of my day every day is going in that weight room with those guys, fourth block, and kind of preaching to them for a second and getting to look back like, coach, we're ready. Let's get to it. And so I think, with that, just trying to, I think, to get to your question, the hardest piece for me, I think right now is to try and, I don't know if it falls more into the category of sustain or finding another 10 or 20% or whatever it is. But, I think for me right now, my focus is that 10 to 20%. How can
Hmm.
we get that 10 to 20 to make us a little bit better? How can we get that 10 to 20 so that we can finish this season on our terms? And
Sure.
again, incredible success here previously, and obviously don't want to take a step backwards. But I think that 10 to 20% of how do we get better? How do we maximize? How can we get bigger, faster, stronger? How can we get more efficient with our meeting time, practice on the field time, things like that? I think right now that's what I'm the most focused on, and I think the difficult
Mm,
piece right now of um, where can we find that? This is a good
yeah.
program. They've had good coaching. They've
Yep.
had great success. How do we take another step? And
Hmm.
so I think right now that's kind of my focus.
It's like you don't want to come in there and like totally upend everything, and then it's like,
Yeah.
and then the other part is, well, I need to, and you're in the mode where you hadn't even seen them practice yet. So you're in evaluation period, like
Hmm.
where can we grow? Where where can we find these little nuggets? And as well as anybody, but like you'll be able to find that in the spring, in the summer, and then
Yep.
maybe it's these things that you never thought of, and maybe it's just little scheme changes that that are more your
Yeah.
preference, and then
Yeah.
finding ways that maybe weren't done, or just
Yeah.
year to
And
year is so
that's
different too. But
and that's so funny Jamie said that, because I was getting ready to say, I took over a head job after Jamie, and like I know everything Jamie does, how he does it. We talk through everything. So it's like the only advantage I had that Jamie didn't have was I didn't have to teach, so I had more time. But I also got to bring in a guy, like right hand man, that I've known since middle school, who was on campus with me.
Yeah.
So immediately it was like, okay, what limited Jamie because of his time with teaching and advising? And what limited because he didn't have a guy really on campus right hand man. He had some great coaches and help and assistant, but like not someone who knew him inside and out and et cetera. So that's kind of the 10 or 20% I was looking at. Okay, here's all the great stuff Jamie already had, but what was he not able to do due to lack of time or lack of help? And that's kind of where I was attacking. And I think that's a harder thing when you're taking over a program that has a good culture. They have had success. It's like, okay, well, like we want to make sure that we're continuing to move forward. And it's like, darn, this guy before me was doing a heck of a job. But what is that 10%? And I think that's kind of what you said, Coach. But no, I got one question I want to ask, Coach. In terms of practice, you can talk defensively, obviously. In terms of practice, what do you think for you is more beneficial, group periods or team periods?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think,
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that. If you
well,
ask me that right
I
now,
don't know.
honestly.
I do. I do.
yeah, I do truly value those group periods. The inside periods, the 7-ons, the one-on-ones, things like that, and just being able to kind of work with and communicate with smaller groups and teach more, immediately, I guess, than everything we did with Coach Knott was, so much tempo, 2 offenses up, 1 defense running hash to hash, and there was predominantly the coaching was done in the film room. And so having those slower periods where we could, run something back, or, I could stand right behind the backer and have my hands on his hips and, hey, boom, guard pull, we're moving this way. And being able to communicate with those guys pretty immediately related to snap and play and things of that nature. And so I think you just, the team periods are invaluable, and the film teaching is an incredible piece that we definitely maximized at Dutch Fork, and would love to do the same at South Florence. But in terms of, I think that small group is just something that where we can kind of start to put it together. We've had our individual
Yeah.
periods. We've kind of been working this stuff. All right, well, you just worked that, and now you just screwed it up. So we're going to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
We're going to try and fix this thing right now. And so I love those group periods.
I think that's where the biggest application happens, in group periods, from indie to group. It's like, group to team is like, okay, we're just bringing all the position groups together and putting it together. But I think the application part from indie to group is where the kids learn the most.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's like a scaffolding effect, and I think each one has its place, right? So, like for me, it may be year to year. Like if we're struggling with like pass protection, like I'd rather just be in team pass like all year, and then make the quarterback, like if we can't protect you, like you're gonna have to figure out a way to like buy time and extend the timeline, like little things like that. But like maybe our pass protection is really good. Now we can spend more time in 7-on-7, or even like routes on air, or what we don't really call it routes on air anymore. But yeah, I think you're right, Coach. I think it's good to be able to coach the kids without like being on script sometimes. Like you don't have to, especially offensively. It's like I got to get through this play script. I don't have time to like fix the quarterback or fix the running back steps. Like I'm sure it's the same way on defense. Like I don't have time running hash to hash for Coach Knott's running 12 personnel down my throat right now. Like we don't have time to freaking like, you know what I mean? Like, or maybe you're stoning them, and you're like, whatever it is. But the same here. Like we're taking sacks. I can't fix pass protection on a 14 play
it's
script
like,
right now.
For me, it's like, man, I want to see 7-on-7 because the scout OL ain't gonna give us a look. When our DBs need a look, man, our linebackers need a look.
I kind of like it like this though. Like I like team pass because I know the defense knows we're passing. Like it makes it harder for us. Like
Mhm.
it's every scenario is like you got to face the best pass rush. You got to face the
Yeah.
best like defensive eyes. Like you have to. It's like team
Mhm.
run. I'd rather do team run because I know it's coming.
Yeah.
You know, so it makes it harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a time and place for everything.
Until he
Practice it.
sneaks a screen in there or
Yeah.
something, act
Well,
like it's
team
game
run.
day.
Hey, team runs, man. Hey, that's like perimeter.
Listen,
Perimeter.
when Coach
Yeah.
Knott was always like team runner, team pass, and on the
Mhm.
schedule before the period, the coach, he would yell it out, your team pass or whatever. And then the defensive coaches would echo him like, "Hey man, shut up, man! Don't say that. Don't tell these guys
Don't
it's
say it.
pass. We got to work.
Bad habits.
Yeah,
Bad
no,
habits.
man.
Yeah.
They don't need to know his team. Just say his team. That's all.
Yeah.
Team.
Yeah.
And
That's awesome.
he was also notorious for like slipping a screen in 7-on-7 or something like that. And the
Yeah.
big guys
Oh,
are looking at me
I
like,
would do it on
"What?"
Bobby Carroll all the time, dude. I would run reverses
Oh,
like he would just like load up on us and then I'd just throw a reverse in on him and like score and he'd be all pissed off.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
what are we
I would
doing?
tell Jamie, man, we were in the spring. I'm like, please throw the bubble right here. Throw the bubble. Just throw it. Just, hey,
Yeah.
throw the fake screen. Throw the China. Throw the
You
Fox
guys got
screen.
19 guys in the box,
Like
team running. Like,
that
what
just
are we doing?
that pisses me off, especially
Yeah.
when it's our own team winning the
They play the
drill.
drill.
It's like
Yeah, they
it's
play
like
the drill.
and like it was early on in the spring, and I wasn't the coordinator yet. And it's like, hey, team screen. And we just play cover 2 the whole time. I'm like, no, guys, like we literally are 80% cover 3 today, but we're going to play
Dude, that
cover
is
2.
hilarious. Yeah,
Like,
they would go out there. We're going Millennial, Oklahoma,
do
and
that.
they're playing like cloud, like
Yeah,
freaking
like-
stars outside of
like-
number 2. What are we doing, man?
yeah.
But no, that's good stuff, man. Good stuff. Well, Coach, this has been an awesome episode, man. We really appreciate you coming on, and we wish you the best of luck at South and all the success to you because you're not in our division. So
No doubt.
go win it all, man.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, man. That's the goal. And again, just feeling blessed to be here and excited to get going.
Yep.
Awesome.
Appreciate you,
Good.
Coach.
Yeah, man. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. See you in the next one.
Thanks for tuning into the Coach Speak podcast. If you're interested in being a guest speaker on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at coachspeakpodcast1@gmail.com. And if you have a question for our Q&A segment, don't forget to submit it through the form in the episode description. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.